Hello, everyone, and welcome to Out of the Archives, episode 3, an event that is convened and hosted by Calvium, the company behind the Place Experience platform. My name's Ben Fax, and I'll be your host for the next 60 minutes or so, although happily you won't have to hear much from me because we have 3 expert speakers who've come along today to share their knowledge and their wisdom and their insight, which I'm sure they'll be in spadefuls. Interestingly, this event is 100% West Country by accident rather than by design, and it's also 66% Amy, which is great representation for the Amy's out there. So if you can see it, you can become it. So I thought before we get going, I'd just take you through a bit of an introduction and explain why we've got everyone together here again today, and also go through a few points of order as well. So for anyone that isn't aware, Calvium is a technology company, which is also based in Bristol. And we have been producing for the last 10 years or so, location-based mobile digital heritage experiences, which is a very long way of saying it. And naturally, we're really interested in this field, in the technologies, but also in the potential for those technologies. And so we hope these events serve as the starter of a conversation, really. Particularly given that there is such a wealth of what you might call content that is publicly owned, publicly managed, and is often very well conserved and catalogued, that represents a real opportunity to engage people with the places they live, the places they work, and naturally also the places that they visit. And when you couple that with the fact that we all have, well, I say all, but most of us have hardware in our pocket that allows us to, locate where we are on a map and view information and so on, then, it's got to the point really where we have technologies that are easy to adopt, easy to scale, and they're also increasingly more and more drivers to do this kind of stuff. And what I mean by that, and, naturally given the title of the event, Out of the Archives, is this increasing focus on engaging people with archived materials, unseen museum collections, hidden histories, more recent social histories. And we're seeing that with, for example, the new Archives Revealed program from the National Archives and their partners, which now places emphasis on that public engagement and indeed mandates that 25% of all the money awarded must be spent on that, which is an interesting shift potentially. So we think it's kind of a good time to be talking about this stuff, if nothing else. Given the number of people who signed up, it suggests that there is appetite to learn more about this stuff. And hopefully, an increasing acceptance that it's not whether we should build in these kind of experiences, but indeed, how we go about doing that. And I'm sure our speakers are going to talk us through some interesting stuff about that shortly. In terms of the sign-ups, there's a really good range of people from all over the country again, and from organisations large and small. So welcome to you all. Points for order-wise, the more astute amongst you might have noticed that we'll be using Zoom, and indeed are using Zoom today. So a couple of points around that. The first main one is that we use the chat function to manage all of our questions for our speakers. So each speaker will have 15 minutes to talk, and directly after that, there'll be a 5-minute period to ask those questions. So if you do want to ask any questions, or indeed just be sociable and, introduce yourself and say where you're from and what you're having for your lunch or whatever, do jump in. You may need to open it up. It may be open by default, but generally you can find it in the little toolbar at the bottom. So yeah, if you do have any questions for the speakers, if you pop them in there, I'll keep an eye on them. And we also have Marissa manning the chat as well, and she'll be keeping an eye on it. The chat will also have resources from the speakers if we have any as they sort of come in. So that's worth noting, and you can provide any sort of general feedback in there as well. You don't have to use the chat, obviously, and naturally. And coupled to that as well is the fact that we are recording the event, as you probably saw when you joined us. So in terms of kind of your personal privacy around that recording, your camera and your microphone is off by default. I'm not sure you can turn it on, but it is off by default. So naturally, you won't appear in the recording in that sense. It also means if you want to hang up any washing or, sit on a beanbag and light a joss stick or whatever, fill your boots. The only way you can identify yourself in that privacy sense is if you use your full name in the chat and ask a question, which I then ask on your behalf. So if you don't want to identify yourself, either just use your first name or a pseudonym, or just don't do it at all. So those are the kind of notes around that, I would say. Right, well, we better crack on because I think I've been rambling quite enough. So the first speaker we have today is the first of the two Amy's. So this is Dr. Amy, no less, which is quite the title. And I'll hand over to you now, rather. I was going to give you an introduction, but you're better doing it yourself, aren't you? So I'll shut up. So over to you, and thanks very much.
Hi, thanks, Ben. Yeah, I'm Amy Frost. I'm the Senior Curator for Bath Preservation Trust, and today I'm going to talk about a project that we are working on at the moment at Beckford's Tower, one of our 4 museums. This is part of a just under £4 million National Lottery Heritage Fund funded project to conserve Beckford's Tower, take it off the Heritage at Risk list, but also completely represent it as a museum, as a space, as a landscape, in order to better tell what is a very complicated and complex history of the creator of the building, William Beckford, and his family, and the wider story of people that hold the surname Beckford. I'd like to point out at this point that it is a story that involves themes of enslavement and exploitation and abuse. And if at any time anyone wants to leave because of that, or wants to know more about that, please do look at our website, and I'll put the link to our website in a minute. So this is Beckford's Tower. It's a 120-foot high building on the outskirts of Bath, and has a small museum collection. I'm just trying to move the slides on. And at the beginning of 2020, we were awarded our lottery development funding to start the development phase, all of which was done during the pandemic. So as you can imagine, public consultation became quite interesting, and we ended up using Zoom a lot for consultation until we could all meet outside for the first time. And that consultation, as you can see on the screen, involved a lot of different community members, a lot of invited organisations and representatives, but also people that just turned up because they'd heard about what we were doing, to come along, have a really incredible kind of workshop, a lot of discussion, a lot of listening, out of which came our interpretation strategy, looking at the key themes of the life of William Beckford. The Beckford family had an immense fortune, all of which came from the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved African people. And that's a core story. And in fact, if we think of our storytelling as a pyramid, that's at the top of our storytelling. That money enabled absolutely everything else. It enabled the building of Beckford's Tower. It enabled the collection that William Beckford put together. It's at the kind of pinnacle of the storytelling. It's fundamental. And it enabled William Beckford to have a level of privilege and power that he used to create, but also to abuse the lives of others. Not just those that he claimed in ownership on the Beckford sugar plantations in Jamaica, but also those in his personal life. And alongside this story, we also have the narrative of the abusive relationship that Beckford had with the young William Courtney of Powder and Parcel in Devon. So there's a lot to unpick, and there's a lot of stories, and it's stories that we were determined to tell through multiple voices, through lots of different perspectives, and at the core of this was co-production and consultation. And we also work in partnership with the other organisations and museums and heritage sites in Bath, who collaboratively have got together to create an action group to better decolonize the story of Bath, and to have the story of Bath and Georgian Bath and its creation as a much more inclusive history. So we've done quite a lot of research. We've done a lot of visiting other places and testing other things. And then we came to the museum itself. So Beckford's Tower is a 2-room museum. This is a picture of the larger room of the museum before this project. So it's a two-room museum with very, very big stories to tell, and stories that need quite a lot of nuance and care, but also stories that can really break open narratives and work with a lot of different people to tell those narratives. And because of this scale and this size, it meant that digital was always going to become fundamental to what we do. And we knew going in that our attitude to that was that digital enhances what the building, the site, the object, the collection can tell. It doesn't take place or replace that. But we knew that digital would give us the idea of both the wider ability to storytell outside of the museum, but also the idea of a digital visitor, which was something we talked about very early on. So when we went into the project and were looking at how we transformed this quite old space that had never really had any investment in its museum into this, which is what it now is, we talked a lot about infrastructure, and that this project was effectively about investing in that infrastructure so that our interpretation could be continually changing, so that the way we tell stories could be flexible. So we needed beautiful new display cases that are GIS standard, so that we could borrow more objects, so that we could change what we're showing. We wanted a flexible display system. We wanted a flexible labeling system where we didn't attach any label to a wall, so that we could be changing a label very, very quickly, change a label in an hour, change a display panel overnight. And that investment in infrastructure extended to our digital platforms as well. So we wanted to use that digital as a way of adding more layers of interpretation, more layers of information, not just as we opened, renewed, the museum opened in June this year, but also ongoing, so that we can continually be adding to those stories as new research is undertaken and as new things were discovered. So our approach to that was on a few levels in terms of the digital tender that went out. We selected working with Calvium and Zubr on this project. And one of the first things that involved was how do we recreate the historic spaces? So this museum space originally looked like this in 1844. When William Beckford had it and used this immense wealth that he got from the transatlantic slave trade to fit it out with very elaborate interiors and art, furniture, decorative art objects that were some of the greatest pieces that were being commissioned or being collected in England at the time. We didn't want to physically recreate these spaces. There was a lot of discussion about authenticity. We knew we didn't want to do that. There is no historic interior left to restore, so it would have been a complete reinstatement. It would have been fake. We wanted that flexible museum space, but we also wanted a way of visitors experiencing what those spaces used to look like. And that's where working with Zubr came in, and the Calvium app having a platform that augmented reality moments could be built into it, so that visitors within the museum could scan the QR code on their own device or on the device they borrow from us. We do not expect everyone to have a smartphone. We do not expect everyone to want to use their smartphone. So we can lend devices out. And by scanning the QR code strategically placed on the floor of the museum, the augmented reality builds the original interior around you. So you get a sense of standing in that place and experiencing what those rooms originally look like. And here on the screen on your left, you can see a member of our community advisory panel testing the AR. And we did a lot of testing with our community advisory panel, with all our staff, with anyone who was turning up at the museum, including the building contractors, actually, to play around with this to see if it would work. And visitors absolutely love it. And there is always this moment where it first comes up and you hear someone say, oh wow, so that idea of it's quite serious stories that we're talking about in the museum, but it is also a space that we want people to come and learn from, but also enjoy. So that wow moment becomes really, really important. Outside the museum, then, the Calvium app, working again with Calvium and Zubr, was about adding layers of information to the landscape. So the tower sits within a wider landscape, and we wanted people to explore that landscape and add the layers of information to it for free. So this is all before the pay barrier of paying to come into the museum. And key to that was trying to make Wi-Fi free, and putting in free Wi-Fi in a Victorian cemetery has been interesting. So there are places where you can get on the free Wi-Fi. It means you can download the app for free. We don't want people to feel like they have to use their own data in order to access it. Is something we're still sort of playing with, because it works at one end of the site and it works at the other end of the site, but you completely lose it in the middle. So, this is still a work in progress. This is still something that we're playing around with, and that's why building in that idea of infrastructure and flexibility at the beginning was so important. So this is using the app. It's a trail around the landscape. You can download it off any of the signs, or in particular places, there are QR codes that take you to a particular site or part of the landscape trail, within which there is information on the screen. There is a piece of audio that you can listen to. So, for example, on the screen, what you can see is the image of the QR code at Beckford's tomb, which then takes you to the element of the trail on the app that tells you about that tomb. But then that you can also click on related stories, where we put in another layer of information where you can hear interviews and discussions with people about particular aspects of the storyline, giving people that option to dig a little bit deeper. And then we also have the family trail and the activity, the kind of quiz, the spotters trail that the app allows you to do. And at the beginning of the app, we put a notice saying that a lot of the content, particularly for families, deals with subjects of enslavement and abuse, and families can make the choice that if they don't want to access that content, we recommend they go straight to the family trail. So we had lots of discussions about age limits, about use of the app, about that kind of care statement or triggering content. And this takes you around the landscape outside. So that was the sort of second part of the digital that we've been using. And then the third part was about accessibility. It is a 120-foot high staircase. It is not the most accessible place for physical accessibility. There are issues with it around visual impairment for accessing that staircase. And we did a lot of focus group work with access users around what we could do. We always knew that what an idea would be to develop a 360 accessible tool. And we said, that could be on an iPad that we could bring down into your car. If you're in the car park, we could build a small structure in the car park. And what came back very, very strongly, particularly from wheelchair users, was wanting to feel like they were physically inside the building, even if they weren't in the museum rooms on the first floor or up the staircase. And we had a vault space, which up until 6 months ago was dark and dingy and full of like really awful kind of rats and everything, just a completely unused space. But we had the ability to open it up from the landscape, from the outside, which we got planning consent to do. And we said it's a very small space, but those access users were really, really insistent that they wanted this space to be where you could go for that accessible content. So what you can see on the bench, just on the right of the image, are two of the Zubr binoculars that you'll hear a bit more about from other Amy in a minute. Which gives people the option of being able to do the 360 tour of the museum rooms, of the tower, of the top of the tower, of the view from the top of the tower, but also of the grotto tunnel, which is not accessible for those with mobility difficulties. And then you can also see our tactile models and braille and large print guides, which are also part of this space. So digital there became a really, really key factor in opening up access to the building, to this quite difficult space. And this leads us to kind of where we go forward. So we reopened the doors of the museum in June 2024, but that's just the start. So that might, a lot of people might see that as the end of the project. That's actually just the start. So that's the start of where we use this infrastructure, this physical infrastructure and this digital infrastructure, to add more and more layers as we move forward. So using that app to bring in more trails, to bring in more stories, to give access to Beckford letters from the archive collection, books that we've just been given to the museum, but also to some of the wider discussions that we're having. So you're going to hear about the photogrammetry with Zubr in a minute, but access to objects that aren't currently on display, linking collections so that we can have a shared narrative with other places. But also really digging into some of those more challenging stories. So looking more at unpicking the relationship, the abusive relationship Beckford had with William Courtney, and particularly research that's about to start, supervised by Professor Robert Beckford, around the weight and the meaning of the surname Beckford, particularly the meaning of the surname Beckford for Black British people descended from those held in enslavement on Beckford plantations. And that's research with 2 PhD research students that started this week. And the idea is that they create content through that research to test for the museum, workshops in the museum, but in particular content that we can add to the app, to the iPad with films on it in the museum, to use of the AR. So all of this is that now about, we've got this infrastructure of the Calvium app. Where do we go next with it, and how do we add to it? So it's a really kind of rambled, very quick overview of what we've been doing in the last couple of years at Beckford Tower, and you'll hear a little bit about some of that with Amy.
Great. Lovely stuff. Thanks very much, Amy. That was not rambling at all. That was very succinct. And I think you've absolutely nailed the brief there. Yeah, just a few comments from me, straight off the bat, if that's okay. I think the flexible display system, it might sound slightly banal, but it's actually really interesting. And yeah, essentially being able to be more agile, as it were, which is
so fundamental. And everything we said, one person needs to be able to do it. So one person needs to be able to get in the cases, move things around, change the interpretation panels. Similarly, like we've got a mounted iPad that Zubr has created some films on. That gives us the ability to add films, to add things, and that flexibility was just so important, because particularly when dealing with narratives that we are, language is changing so fast, terminology is changing so fast. Consultation with other people means that we need to be able to be really agile in terms of what our content is and who's informing it.
Yeah, indeed. And well, kind of on that note, or related at least, I thought it was interesting how much emphasis you put on user testing, which is great to see. But I suppose just a quick question, and we should press on really. In regards to users, what's the response like since you've been open? So it's only been a few months, right?
Yeah. So it's been 2 months, 2 and a bit months. Really, really good. We've had a few sort of snagging things and a few things that, as much testing as we do, and we did a lot, it doesn't really get tested until the visitors are coming through the door. So there's things about kind of functionality, or even just people downloading the app that we sort of had tried to make easier, tried to kind of like build it also into the welcome that they get when a staff member talks to them. And that's that's really simple things, but things that kind of that level of even testing before you launch can't solve, because until you've got 40 people all trying to do it at the same time in a tiny museum, you're not really kind of getting to grips with how it works. So it's given us a lot to kind of play around with, and I think that's the benefit of the project hasn't finished. It's the benefit of knowing that we've got more time, but also the ease of using the system. So, you know, that a colleague and I can add content to the app through the management system, because someone has pointed out that, you know, we've spelled something wrong, or there's a new photograph that's been given. That kind of flexibility, it just makes it, yeah, it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, great. And you know, one of the strengths of anything digital, really, isn't it? Done well, at least, which is not always the case.
Yeah, and I think the way that we designed everything as well is that if it's not working, it's removable. We have one mounted iPad that if for some reason something doesn't work, we just take the mount off and you wouldn't know it's not there. So, you know, that thing of absolutely from the beginning not wanting there to be a laminated sign saying, sorry, this isn't working at the moment. We built in how it would look and where it would go right from the very beginning, so that we knew that we could just remove it if it wasn't working.
Happy days. Well, great stuff, and a real model, I would suppose, for other people as well to potentially to learn from and adopt. Yeah. So, all right. Well, in the interest of time, we'd better crack on. But thank you very much indeed. That was absolutely amazing. Really, really interesting stuff. So up next we have what was just referred to as the other Amy, which is a terrible way of putting it. But I'll hand over to you straight away in the interest of time. But welcome, and I'm sure you're going to absolutely nail it. So yeah.
Thank you. I feel like I've had like a very nice welcome from Amy as well. So a big thank you for that. I'm gonna kind of do a very whistle-stop tour for you today. I'm gonna stop my timer because otherwise I'm gonna forget how much I've talked. But essentially I'm going to do a little whistle-stop tour through some of our different projects over the last couple of years. So I'm another Amy, and I work for a company called Zubr. I am their producer, but in a prior life, I was a museums and heritage professional. So I used to work in interpretation and curation. But now I kind of manage our sub-brand, which is called Zubr Curio, which manages all of our work around anything to do with kind of heritage, arts, culture, and tourism. And I'm hoping you can see all my slides and that they're going to work. Here we go. So just to start off with a little bit of a summary about who Zubr are. So we are a fairly small company of 11 people based in Bristol, and we specialise in augmented and virtual reality, mixed reality, whatever you want to call it these days. We've got a primarily in-house team, so we do everything from kind of initial consultation through to graphic design, 3D modelling, AR calibration, development, kind of anything and everything in between. And we have been established since 2015, and within that time done about 400 projects, and it's just a real huge range of different outputs, so anything from kind of web AR, social media filters, apps, VR experiences, we do it all. Essentially, a lot of people come to us with a problem. They'll say, you know, we've got this story we want to tell, or we want to give access to these collections, or I don't know, my heritage site used to look like this, but now it looks the opposite. How can we tell these stories with people in an engaging digital way that will hopefully kind of draw in new audiences in an accessible, intuitive, educational and entertaining way? And we put our thinking caps on and work out what the best way to deploy that is. I've got a little video, which I'm hoping isn't going to play very loud. Oh, here we go. So this is a bit of a show reel of some of our work over the last few years. In the interest of time, I'm just going to keep talking. Hopefully it's not too distracting. But I think seeing is believing with some of this stuff, and it's quite hard to talk about augmented or virtual reality without being able to show you something. But you'll see from this show reel that it really is a big mixture of different content on lots of different deployment devices. I'd say the main focus of our work is actually almost getting people to forget that they're using technology. We really strongly believe that people should be present in the physical spaces that they're in. So I always describe what we do as peeling back layers of the real world, or getting people to look closer at the real world. So rather than feeling like people are immersed in their phones or distracted and kind of isolated from each other within the physical space, actually what we try and do is get them to look closer at something through their devices, using things like iPads and phones, almost like a magnifying glass, to take a closer look at something, whether that's an art installation, physical items in the collection that are on display, or actual, you know, buildings themselves, heritage sites that you walk around. So hopefully that video has given you a little bit of insight into what we do. I'm now going to, like I say, do a very whistle-stop tour through some of my kind of favourite projects. Oh, if I can get off this video. Here we go. This is actually my first project that I worked on with Zubr, but I was actually a Zubr client. So I used to work for Bristol Old Vic as their heritage engagement manager, and delivered their NLHF kind of 250-year anniversary project. And it was on that project that I met Zubr, like I say. So as part of that renovation, we created an AR app that would allow people to explore the modern day foyer that was built between 2016 and 2018. And we wanted to give them the opportunity to walk around that space and see how it looked through different time periods. So we focused on the 1770s, 1860s, 1910s, and 1970s. And Zubr very cleverly modelled what the foyer would have looked like in each of those time periods based on archival collections. It was a partnership project with Bristol Old Vic, Bristol Archives, and then the University of Bristol Theatre Collection as well. So we had some amazing source material to draw from, everything from angry letters that had been sent into the theatre managers about, lighting not working, all the way through to kind of playbills, programmes, photographs, costume design, everything in between. So this was a really fun project for me as a heritage professional, because it was the first real time that I utilised augmented reality to kind of visualise a space that I knew very well, or that I had read about a lot, but to actually kind of physically see it and be able to move through those spaces was really, really special. The way this worked, it was an AR app that you could download to personal devices, or we handed out iPads in the theatre foyer as well, so people could loan them, take them around the theatre, hand them back in. And when you moved through that space, in the bottom left, you can see this sort of strange portal. As you walked around, these would appear organically, and you would kind of physically walk through into the portal, and then what you could see around you would change. So you could see how that exact spot used to look at different time periods. We had these sort of items of interest in there as well. So it was a bit of a treasure hunt where you could go around, collect different items, find out different nuggets of history about the theatre. And we actually worked with a script writer, being a theatre, we thought it would be great to get some creatives involved, who helped us voice Kathleen Barker, who is an archivist and historian, who we have as the kind of authoritative narrator running through the app. Like I say, this is very whistle stop, so I'm going to keep going on and then dig a bit deeper in the end. But this is another example of a digital project that we created a few years ago now. So this was a bit of an experimental project for Carrickfergus Castle and Tourism Northern Ireland. And this was about giving people access to Carrickfergus Castle whilst it was closed for renovations. And my sort of favourite thing about this project is how we created a bond between physical movement and digital content. So you'll see here, kind of the top is the real world view, the bottom is what you experience when you utilise the app. And the way that interactivity worked in this particular project was that you needed to physically move to cause the digital content to appear. So if you physically walked towards the cannon, it would actually fire and animate at the ship that is augmented into the harbour. And if you moved from side to side horizontally while sticking at the castle wall, all of the bricks would fall down in this amazing animation, and then you could see people moving inside the castle, going about their daily life. So those are two projects which use augmented reality to kind of peel back layers of history and show visitors just a sort of different perspective. I'm gonna, like I say, just keep powering on through with some more examples, but this is a more recent project that we've been working on for the Acropolis in Athens. And this project has had several different iterations. So we built an app for, it's actually for a big mobile company who are putting 5G into the Acropolis site. So we worked on an app for them, which allows you to view the physical monuments as they would have looked in the 5th century. So if you go on site at the Acropolis, you can use their physical signage, so their information boards that are all around the site, to calibrate the 3D models that we've built, showing how the site used to look. And you can walk around in sort of like one-to-one and see what the interiors would have looked like as well as the exteriors. We've also built our own version of this app, which is really good for schools because it's got an off-site mode. So you can utilize a sort of big floor tracking image to launch the same content, and children can utilize that in the classroom to learn more about classics and ancient history. And it's, again, that kind of practice of putting yourself in a space that no longer exists and getting to kind of walk in the footsteps of people who would have been there previously. Moving on, this is a VR project. Actually, it's two VR projects that we created for the Tower Museum in Derry in collaboration with Derry and Strabane District Council. So we did an initial project with them, which looked at telling the stories of Irish people emigrating out to the US in the 1800s. And that is one of my favorite projects that we've done because we utilized a lot of different technologies for this. So you'll see we did a lot of green screen capturing with actors. This was in partnership with the university there as well. And we had a really great time working with students doing hair and makeup and things like that. And we captured actors with stereoscopic video, and then we comped them into our virtual reality scenes. So our 3D modelers rebuilt the historic docks of Derry, the ship that people would have travelled on through to New York, and then New York Harbour as well. And then we have comped in the real actors. You can see there's kind of a chap leaning over a book that you signed, then get your ticket on board the ship. So it was a really lovely project because A, so many people worked on it and it was a really good collaborative effort. B, we were utilising archival material that had really recently been discovered. And I think, I mean, I love paper documents, but for a lot of visitors, they're quite hard to engage with. And this was a way to kind of really physically engage with things like logbooks and tickets and things like that. And then it's also just a very beautiful looking project. It's a really fun one to experience, and we got to take it to the Maritime Festival 2 years, which was really, really well received, and people had a lot of fun with that one. We then did a follow-up project, which was about looking at how the city of Derry evolved, kind of from prehistoric times to modern day. I've only got one image of that, which is in the bottom left, but this was a VR experience which we set. You're kind of on a ship in a captain's room, and you've got your sort of big map table in front of you, and you can physically turn the wheel, and as you do that, the table flips over and you get different iterations of Derry City, which appear before you, showing how that evolved. These are both sort of free to play in the Tower Museum in Derry, and have been, again, really well received. I think both of these projects are just a really fun way of taking archival content and bringing it into the 3D. So that, it's one of my favorites. Just wanted to pop that one in there. I know VR is not for everybody, and I'll kind of come back to that in a little bit. Obviously, there's quite a lot around visitor management with that, making sure that equipment doesn't break. You need to do quite a bit of supervision. So I would say predominantly we do augmented reality for heritage and tourism sites normally, because it's a lot more, I guess it's a lot less intensive for organizations to run. But yeah, I'll come back to that with our binoculars in a minute. Like Amy mentioned, we utilize photogrammetry a lot in our work. So we've got a wonderful 3D modeling team, but if we can take elements from the real world and kind of utilize them within our experiences, then we'd love to do that. Like I say, we're a digital company that tries to make things that feel very material still. And photogrammetry is a really wonderful way to take items from the collection that might be either too fragile or maybe don't belong to the particular site that you're located at, and bring them into a new space. So there's a couple of images here from the photogrammetry that we did for the Beckford's Tower project. So there was a Nautilus shell related to the collections, which I believe is still on loan at Beckford's Tower if you want to go and see it. But that is normally based at Waddesdon Manor. So our team went up and conducted photogrammetry on that, created this 3D scan that we then put into augmented reality through Calvian's PEP app. And then on the left, we actually went to the SS Great Britain, which is one of our local museums, and did some 3D scanning of their dockyard, because that gave us a whole bunch of props to play with that we could put into the virtual reality scenes that we did for the Derry projects that I mentioned previously. I can tell I'm really running out of time, so I'm going to keep powering on. I just want to talk to you about this project, which is something that we'll be launching this autumn. It's an ongoing project that we've got with the American Battlefield Trust out in South Carolina. And again, this is probably one of my favorite projects because it involves bringing the history of Revolutionary War battlefields to life, which is not my specialist subject, but it is really, really powerful to go to what today are kind of parks or fields, and think about the history of those sites, and kind of witness what these battles would have looked like. I have got a video. I'm not going to play it for the sake of time, but I'll share. I think that can be shared around after the call to show a bit more. But we've essentially modelled different fortifications and different moments from key battles that happened at each of these sites. It's been a lot of working with local universities, the indigenous communities, because some of the land has got kind of multi-heritage, and we wanted to tell different stories within the same space. And digital is a really good way to do that, because you can look at the Revolutionary War history, but you can also look at the same site as it would have appeared when the Santee community were living there, kind of way before the Revolutionary War. Like I say, I'll skip this video, sorry. And then just kind of wrap up, I guess, by just saying this project is really special for us because we're doing lots of different deployments for it. And something that we always try to do is to give people like a really good rate of return, basically. So if we're going to 3D model something, which is quite time consuming and costly, we then want to make sure that you can utilize those 3D models in as many ways as possible. So for this particular project, we've created assets that they can put, as like normal video on a website. We've got 3D models that they can put on Sketchfab or Eighth Wall, which is a web AR platform that they use a lot. We've got 2 apps as part of this project, and then 3 different binocular installations. So the binoculars that you can see in the middle there are something that are pretty unique to us. I think we're the only company, definitely in the UK, if not the world, that's making something like this. And this is a product that has come out of lots of conversations with people across kind of local councils, museums, tourism, who wanted a kind of more analog, intuitive, easy to use way of showing digital content for visitors that didn't need apps to be downloaded. So you essentially go up, you look through the binoculars as you would normal binoculars, and you see either content augmented over kind of a camera feed, or you can see fully virtual content as well. So we've got 3 of these units out in South Carolina. One's installed, 2 are being installed this week, which we're really excited about. And that's going to be a way for people to look at these kind of battlefield scenes, which will be calibrated so that they line up with the real world site. Without needing to download anything. I feel like I'm probably over time. I could talk about this forever. It's my job, it's what I love. I think we're really lucky in that we get to basically hear all of the amazing stories and histories of different museums, different locations, and then find a way to bring them to life for people creatively. So it's a really fun job. And if anybody's got any questions, I can talk further about binoculars with you. I can talk about AR trails, apps, different techniques and what we'd advise. You're welcome to get in touch.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know what you're worried about. That was absolutely brilliant. Yeah, so much stuff in there. We are running very short on time. It has prompted a few questions. If I could ask you to be extremely succinct in your answers, that would be appreciated. So there's a few questions essentially around maintenance of things. So whether it's the QR codes or the binoculars. Yeah, do you have any kind of comments about that?
Yeah, sure. So it's one of the first things that I try and talk about with people, because often it's left till the end, and it's obviously like a really important thing. You don't want to invest in something, it works really well for the first 6 months or year, and then it doesn't go any further. We tend to do kind of bespoke support contracts for everything that we do. So in terms of physical installations, when we do the binoculars, we'll talk you through kind of basic maintenance of them. They don't require that much maintenance, if you know what I mean. It's useful to have someone who, if there's bird poo, or in South Carolina big spiders that are going to come and invest the units, but we can do remote support, we can send people out and do different things like that. There's sort of like bespoke support packages for whatever's needed. In terms of QR codes, again, different options for the site really. We're quite flexible, and we kind of just try and treat each case by what it needs. It's not a very good answer, sorry.
No, that's good. That's good. Let me stop you there. Yeah, if you do want to share any of the resources around the South Carolina project, please do so in the chat, and naturally we will send that as part of all of the follow-up content to the event alongside the recording. But there's a few more questions specifically around that in there. In terms of AR costs, if you could give me a 10-word answer or less, which is probably impossible, but lots of people, I think, are confused about the cost or just don't know the kind of ranges. Could you just give us an idea of like just ranges, as it were, for this sort of stuff?
Sure. It definitely is a as long as a piece of string answer, but I would say the majority of heritage projects that we work on range between about £15,000 and £30,000.
Okay.
I'd say the cheaper end. I always encourage people to do a toe dip first, like do something small with a small amount of money. Say it's something for sort of like 2 to 5 grand. See if it lands with the audience. Do a really good series of testing, and then think about what is going to have the most impact on your audience. The bigger projects that require a lot of 3D modeling and character work can be a lot higher. And if you've got hardware, that also increases the cost. Again, we try and work with our clients and just work out what's actually going to work for them and then cost it intuitively. But I'd say as a ballpark, you can do something really effective for, sort of, I don't know, that 15 sort of,
that's good.
Probably the middle ground.
Yeah, I think, don't worry, you've covered it. Very good. Well, I don't think it's kind of crazy amounts of money, which is interesting. It seems pretty achievable. Right. Well, thank you very much to you. Like I said, absolutely nailed it. So really good. And please do jump into the chat if there's any additional comments. So up next we have Kathryn Davis, from Visit West, I should say, who I believe has joined us, and I very much hope has joined us.
I have. So, I've definitely joined you.
Oh, huzzah. Happy days. So I'll hand over to you immediately in the interest of time, but welcome, and thanks very much for agreeing to talk to all of us today.
Thank you. I'm just going to waffle a bit while I make sure my screen is shared effectively. My name is Kathryn Davis. I am the Managing Director of an organisation called Visit West. Right. And can I just check that you can see that okay now? Because I've blocked everybody else out. We're all good.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So I work for what's called an LVAP, and I'll come into that in a minute. But I'm going to talk to you about the real virtual opportunity. These images were from 2018 and 2019 when we delivered the UK's first 5G testbed in Bristol with applications for the visitor economy in Bristol and Bath. So there's a little bit of heritage in here. But just very quickly, Visit West has a history that goes back 25 years, despite the name Visit West only being around for a couple of years. The company has 2 roles. As I said, we're an accredited local visitor economy partnership, or an LVEP, otherwise known as a DMO or a tourist board if you go back a bit. And we also deliver 3 business improvement districts in the Bristol area. I'm going to focus on the tourism side for the purposes of this call, but essentially our job is to grow the visitor economy sustainably. And we do this through both activations around consumer, the travel trade, which is the B2B side, Convention Bureau, and also working closely with local businesses. So we're a not-for-profit, public-private sector partnership. We have a membership scheme, and we have some 600 members, predominantly in the west of England region, but a few particularly large visitor attractions around the area. So Visit West is a brand that we use to focus on that local support to local businesses. It's about generating routes for market, and it's all about business support. Our consumer channels, Visit Bristol and Visit Bath, are the ones that people are most familiar with because that's where we drive all the campaigns and all of our digital. If you haven't yet, please follow us on Instagram, and I'll put the link in because we got hacked, and so we have to rebuild from scratch. So anyone who feels like a follow, that would be lovely. And then all our work on the B2B side. So I said this is Convention Bureau, looking at business events. We write bids for everything from sports events to cultural events. We find venues for people. So it's how we connect the professional industry with solutions in the west of England, both reactively and, more importantly, proactively. So looking at augmented reality and virtual reality, the one thing for us is how can we tell stories about what's no longer visible? And the reason I picked this as a title is, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about, So the work of an LVEP, and particularly in the tourism field, is all about storytelling. How do you tell stories about your destination? What is the narrative that you're selling? And it can be quite tricky when you've got cities that are culturally diverse. In Bristol and Bath, you've got beautiful surrounding coast and countryside. How do we pick what we do? Well, a couple of years ago, last year, after a year's development, we launched a destination management plan, which you can find on the Visit West website. And we came up with what we call our 3 growth themes, one of which is heritage reinterpreted. We also have wellbeing and new culture, but we feel like the work, particularly around AR, sits really nicely with the heritage reinterpreted. And I didn't catch all of Amy's meeting because I was running across the road to get from another meeting. But I've had the fortune experience of testing the Breakfast Tower AR, which is just fabulous. And I can get really quite nerdy on it. And when we say about telling the stories, particularly in Bristol and Bath, you've got some quite troubling and difficult stories to tell. And so how do you tell these in a responsible way, in a way that we're not necessarily sugarcoating, but a way that brings communities, heritage and history together? One of the things that we looked at was in Bristol, where we did a lot of work with the World Food Tourism Association around a food tourism strategy. Now, on the left-hand side, you'll see a little plaque that says that this was the site of the fries factory in Bristol. If you know Bristol, it's on Union Street, outside Subway, in between KFC. But on the right-hand side, that is the footprint. It was enormous. And as part of the work we were doing about the heritage of food and food production, because Bristol produced the first solid chocolate bar and the first chocolate Easter egg, but wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to fold up and see just this vast scale of production in the city, because it would have dominated the landscape. I mean, if we could get smells in there, great. But this is one of the stories where we're looking at industrial heritage and how you deliver it in a way that's engaging and exciting. The second one is an actual experience that I had in China earlier this year in Zhangjiajie. Zhangjiajie has got this incredible experience which has a glass bridge, and you can bungee jump from the glass bridge if you really want to. Technically, you could do a hot air balloon ride, but anyone who's worked in the Bristol area knows that hot air balloons are quite temperamental, and they don't like it too hot and they don't like it too cold, and it can't be too windy and it can't be too still and it can't be too wet. And what they've developed in Zhangjiajie is a virtual balloon ride, but in a real balloon basket. And they do use the burners a little bit. So you can take this incredible experience and a virtual balloon ride, which I think there's a huge opportunity for in Bristol and Bath area, where people want to take hot air balloons rides. After all, we're the home of hot air ballooning in the UK, with a phenomenal experience that's a little bit more weatherproof. The third experience is really around film and TV locations. Film and TV locations, set jetting, location vacation. This is a big thing now, and it's going to be our National Tourist Board Visit Britain's campaign for a few years. And obviously, it's wonderful when you're able to share filming, in this case, Bridgerton, so people can find you when they're watching the programme. But wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to have some kind of AR experience around locations and see those actors on set, either as a behind the scenes or as to see your favourite characters actually interacting with the businesses that you have. And you do have traditional tours that take on location tours, and these tend to be quite analogue. And we think that it would be wonderful, and it would give you a phenomenal experience to be able to deliver some of these tours with actual content from the programs that you've been watching. And it's something that we need to find a way to put in a funding bid for. So again, very happy to hear from people who might be able to signpost us to that. And again, from our perspective, we tend to focus on in destination all about the augmented reality. So how do you enhance the story that you're telling in a way that's much more productive and actually enriches the visitor experience? We do have VR experiences, and people can come and experience them like they can any other visitor attraction. But when you're looking at VR, what we do tend to look at is actual reality as opposed to virtual reality. After all, when we look at Bath and recreating that Georgian experience, you can look at augmented or virtual reality. But this month, when we have the Jane Austen Festival, that actual reality is something that people are going to be able to experience on the streets, which you could capture then and share. And events and festivals are a really important way of sharing content as you move forward. And finally, this is a relatively new Bristol attraction called Wake the Tiger. And Wake the Tiger is the world's first Imaginarium, and it's fully augmented AR experience. And if you've not visited, I can't recommend it enough. And you are literally immersing yourself in another world. So it just shows that we have this wonderful blend of how you use augmented reality to enhance an experience, virtual reality to create new experiences, and then actual reality can still take you on a journey to another world. And I've galloped through that because I'm very aware of time.
Excellent. Really good galloping. That was phenomenal stuff. It really was. So yeah, absolutely cracking talk there, and just fascinating and just really useful to hear that intersection of, the sort of visitor economy or destination management and then heritage assets and the experiences you can build around them, which is absolutely brilliant. If I may say, the balloon ride stuff is very interesting as a Bristolian, and I have myself tried to go in a balloon and they don't work. There's a reason we use planes, isn't there, really?
Yeah, I mean, when you do it, it's incredible, but there are a lot of things that have to be in your favor and a lot of variables that have to happen. There is still nothing like it, but to be able to have that fallback would be pretty incredible.
Well, I couldn't agree more. So I thought it was, really interesting. You were talking about food and about fries and, the size of that estate and everything else, which is, super interesting. And again, speaking as Bristolian, you would not know that the chocolate bar on the Easter egg was invented there. So yeah, if you could do something around that, and indeed, I'm not sure if you do have plans, like what would be the kind of the aim with that, as it were? Would you be hoping to sort of model it so that people could understand the scale, or would it be more intimate and be about noises and maybe smells or whatever it might be?
I mean, I think you can have some real fun with it in terms of scaling it up because, these are stories that are going to get forgotten. And if we don't find a way of preserving them and telling these stories, and to have a tour guide that tells you this was the site of the world's first solid chocolate bar, that's great, but there's nothing to say that. But if you can have an experience, and I think it's the scalability of it that's exciting, and without being too dull and practical, you just look for that funding opportunity and you can scale it up or down accordingly. And this is I'm not a technical expert. I've done some work in technology, but I'm renowned for having this reputation. Wouldn't it be cool if? And then we find a way to make it.
Nice. Yeah, well, that's why the dreamers will inherit the world, So, yeah, that's great to hear. We should wrap it up there. Unbelievably, we've actually pretty much kept to time, which is amazing. I can see some of the links have gone in the chat already, but we will share all of the materials that you might send over, Kathryn. So thanks in advance for that. For everyone else, thank you so much for coming along to another one of these events. I hope you found it useful and, you've been educated and perhaps even entertained as well. As always, we'll look to put on another one of these in the next few months. So, if you do know anyone you think might have something interesting to say on the theme, please do get in touch. Also, any questions you might have for the speakers that come to mind over the next few days, do send them through to us and we'll try to make those connections. We'll be sending out a package of content next week to everyone that's signed up. So that will have the recording and it will have all the resources in one nice, easy, shareable way. On the note of sharing, please do forward it on to colleagues, friends, loved ones, whoever really. I think, yeah, more people who engage with it, hopefully the better. Other than that, it only serves to say that I have been Ben Fax and you have been brilliant. So thanks very much. Have a good afternoon.